Hello everyone, welcome back to this new tutorial. Shal here from Dravia Studio, and today we have to talk about Luxcore Gi Cache. And this feature is very important. It's one of the best features of Luxcore engine. It is a feature which greatly accelerates and speed up interior rendering and send with a lot of GI. And it is a feature you find in software like Corona or Vray and even Redshift. And this is very interesting, and it's actually important to know how to use it because it can make a great thing for you. But I just read on the internet that people find this feature quite complicated to use and they don't know how to use all the settings. So today, for all the beginner and even the pro, we're gonna make Luxcore Gi Cache very simple for everyone because it is actually very simple when you understand the principle. So for this tutorial, I just built this small room, and you can see that it is very small, 4 by 4 almost room. Okay, but it is enough for our needs to understand GI cache. So to start, I just launch the render without the GI cache enabled so that everyone can see the difference. So first we have our brute force render, pick, and we stop. So we have almost 6-second rendering, and we just switch to the second slot and we enable GI cache. Okay, and we let all the parameter by default and we just launch it. Okay, have to wait a little bit for the computation of the cache here, computing cache, and when it's done, the render start, and you see in 10 seconds, on 11 seconds, we have a render much cleaner than the half tracer. See the difference, even in such a simple scene, and it can be even faster, because at the end of the tutorial you will learn how to, for example, make the cache persistent so you don't have to compute it again. So let's start to understand how this feature works. So by default, as we see here, these settings are being made and set by the developer and the artist to make it very compliant to a lot of different scene. So it may work in a lot of scene, but it is not obviously optimized for each particular case. Let's explain it. So the first setting here, if you read the tooltip, it says this is the max number of photon traced. The value is in millions. So when you see 20, it is actually 20 million polygon as max photon, 20 million photon traced in your scene. So by experience, you don't need such a high value for such a small scene. So for example, for a little room like this, 4 by 4, you can just use 1 million, and even this value is the smallest value you can get. You see, 1 million photon is just enough for a scene like this. And you will see that if we just launch this 1 million scene here in the third slot, see that the cache computing will not take long, very fast actually, and you see we have the same result: 1 million, 20 million, 1 million. Actually look the same, and it is pretty fast to compute. Why it is important? Because you may have a slower computer, you may have to work on a laptop and you don't have a strong CPU, and if you have too high value here, you will have to compute for very long the cache. So you need to be aware that this value is important for the speed of the computation of your cache. Okay, so how you can set this value easily? So if, let's say, you have a room like we have here, 4 by 4, you can say that for each time you have a 4-meter longer room, you can use 1 million, 1 by 4, 1 million for each 4-meter. So if the room is 8-meter, you will use 2 million. If it is 12-meter, you can use 3 million. So with this simple thing in mind, you take the longest part of your scene. Let's say, for example, we have a second scene here, which is the gen map scene. Use it and the benchmark comparison with cycle. And if you take this scene, for example, and measure this side, you can see that we have 56, and even in this scene 56, if you divide 56 by 4, you will be around how much? 25 divided by 2, again you will be around 12 and 10, and you see that 10 was enough to render this huge scene. And actually it is not just huge, it is even complicated because you have a lot of walls everywhere. All the room inside are calculated and Photon are used in all the world. You have a lot of diffuse surface on the floor, on the ceiling, everywhere. But 10 million was enough for such a huge scene. And even the exterior, you will see here, the Photon, the 10 million Photon was enough for this. So for such a small scene, 1 million should be enough. And each 4-meter you have, you can put another 1 million. So easy for this setting. So now we go to the next setting, this one. So we have a value of 8 for the Photon. And if you look at the tooltip, it says this is the max depth of Photon path at each bounce. A photon might be stored. So you can view this value as the value we see here, which is the max bounce. So for example, if you don't render with GI cache and you are rendering with simple path tracer, by increasing this diffuse value for example 4 to 32, you're gonna see that your render will be a bit brighter, even sometimes a lot brighter depending of the material. So this is the same thing here. The 8 value is enough for a lot of projects, and if you don't even need such a quality, you can even fall by 4, but I never use this value because I'm always on the eye setting. I like to have very nice bouncing and natural look, so most of the time I can stay on 8 for the start of the scene to just set up my scene, and when I've finished everything, the lighting, the modeling, everything is correct, I can set this number to even 64. This way I will get a much brighter interior. So for example, we're gonna compare the 64 with the 8 we have here. So let's launch it and wait a minute. So it should not take too long because we don't have a lot of Photon to compute. Okay, so you see I stopped it quickly and you see that here it is a bit darker and here it is a lot brighter. You see the difference. Even in this small room, you can see that by increasing this value, you will have a much brighter look. But if you, for example, reduce the value to very low value like 3, which is the bare minimum, see, it's quite good, but see, it is a bit faster, but you see the difference in brightness. So if you are not interested in quality, you want to make and your computer is very slow, you can play down this value, but I don't recommend it because you can use a bigger value to have a better quality and even save your cache so you don't have to compute it again. So just use 8 as the default for the start of your scene, and when you are ready to launch everything, you can crank up this value to get a much better result. So I will let it to 64 for the rest of the tutorial. So now the third value, which is here. So it is a glossiness threshold. The reason for this setting is that unlike the path tracer, which is a robust algorithm, we can be used for reflective surface and diffuse surface and be always unbiased. And GI caching, you have to be aware that GI caching lose in quality and precision when there is a lot of reflective surface. So this value is there for you to control the where you spend the computation of the engine. Do you want, for example, your GI cache to be in charge of the reflective surface? So you will be using a very low value like 0.001, but this is not this does not make sense because GI cache is not really good at reflection. In my experiment, sometimes it can work, but if you go low like this, you can even get some trouble because you start to have some artifacts. So most of the time I keep this value to 0.5 as default, but most of the time I recommend even to double this value to be sure of the quality, so you get rid of all possible artifacts. And another thing I just want to tell you is that if you work with GI cache, you have to be aware of the fact that you need to have thickness to your wall and your geometry and have very well designed geometry. So this will be a good thing to stop you to have artifacts. So you have to keep this in mind also. So let's continue now to the rest of the settings here. So down here you have another two parameter, and actually this parameter is essential. So it's a brute force radius. So as I explained you, the Photon GI cache, when you use it, is not alone at computing your scene. You will see, I show you, you see this debug version, you can show indirect and pass myth. So let's see how it look here, and 6th slot. And you will see second for the GI tool here, and you see that we have this blue map, and everything you see here which is in blue is all the part that is calculated by the GI cache, and every part you see in red, like here on the corner where there is fine detail and where there is possibility for GI cache to get error, so the engine will be using the brute force render. So you will get rid of artifact, light leaking. So it is a way to avoid artifact. So using 8 is a good value, but sometimes you want to be a lot faster, so you tend to reduce this value so as much as possible, so that you continue to keep the speed. So for example, let's reduce for this render the value to 1. You will see that still we are okay without. So you see we have less of the red part, which means that here we have most of our part computed by the GI cache. So this is good for the performance, and you will see that even in full mode here we still kept the quality. See, 1 second. Okay, so you see no light leaking, everything is still fine, and we have this beautiful GI. So good value. We continue, and you have the last setting, which is normal angle. So this value has been put here for you to set up how much photon you want to spend on fine detail. So I don't want to explain it too much, but I think that the value of 10 is enough. But if you, for example, start to increase this value, for example, to 90 degrees, so you start to have error in the corner, because as the tooltips say, you will have photon used in both parts. So in this flat path, you will have, let's say that your map, for example, show you with the show and direct. If I put, for example, 90 degree and render it, you see, we will have a map, and we see that here, okay, you will see that here it is blurry, it is not very defined, and we don't quite see the corners. This is because the render engine will use the same photon on the surface up and also in this wall. So this will give you less defined corner and less defined detail. So I quite tell people to stick to this number, which is 10 degrees, which is good. So let's go to this value here, to this slot, and you will see with 10 degree how it look with our indirect map. So you see, if you put the 10 degree here, you will see that we have all the corner well traced correctly, everything is well defined. But if you put for the 90 degrees, you see that everything start to look blurry, not well defined. It will still give you a nice render, but you can easily get some artifacts. So I tell you to stick to this number, so you don't have to really care about this number. So what is next? Okay, we can just say that this is all, but this is not all. We will go to render an actual complete scene. This is a scene I have made with Luxcore online library. So this is the for all the people which are very used to it. This is this library. You can find all the assets here. So you can see that we have a lot of objects inside. So let's see if all the number we put here are actually interesting with all the parameter we have here. So let's render. I keep it on the normal mode, and let's render and see if all the value we just use is still enough when we have complexity inside of the room. We have to wait a little bit, and we see everything look fine, almost. I say almost, you will see why. Let's the render clean up a bit. Okay, this is enough, and I just show you one thing here. You can see that we have a light leak here. See this light leak, and if I reduce this brute force value, we see that it will get worse. And how we can fix it? So when you start rendering and you see that with all your good value you put, you start to get light leak, and at the start you didn't get them, but when you start to add geometry, get some light leak, then you know that your brute force radius is not enough. So you have to increase this value to get rid of this artifact here, this light leak. So I'm gonna put 4, and let's see how it look after we crank up this value. So it's like we are telling to the engine, so you see this corner, just put more path tracing in the corner and less GI cache. So you see, by putting a bit more brute force on the corners and well-defined place, get rid of the artifact, and just we kept the speed, so we still have the good speed. And you see the noises in just 30 seconds we have a very clean render, so it's look okay because here we have a good value 0.1, so there is not lot of reflective surface being calculated, so we have less scene less prone to error. And also here, because we have a nice value, we can get the speed and also avoid all the light leak issue. And the final thing I want to tell you is about the compute and save. When you have a scene like this, you can just check this button here, just go to a folder, rename your PGI setting and save, and then when it is computed you can uncheck and use the file which is already computed. This is actually interesting because it helps you when you are doing animation, and it will speed up the workflow a lot for you. And actually you will see that, for example, I have kept this value for almost all my animation. I always use this persistent cache. Also, I actually have another scene inside this blend file here, and in this scene we have a cloth here with some air particle, so you can see it here. What is it? Okay, you can see it here. Okay, so most of the time by experience I just noticed that GI cache don't work well with translucent material, so I just disable it when I have a material with translucency. I take my cloth here, we say that it is a matte translucent material. This is for the hair here, so I just uncheck this button here so that the cache is not used here, and this will help you to not store cache here because it is not very interesting. Here you will get very dark air, so I just let this kind of air particle being calculated by the force engine. So it is something just have to be aware of to set up your thing. And also, if you have a carpet with some air on it, you can just come here, or a lot of detail, and just uncheck the use Photon GI cache on the material used by the air and the particle of your carpet or your cloth. So this also is a good practice to have, to not have very complicated and very long GI cache calculation. And this is all for this tutorial. I see you the next time.